to Sinclair Fine Foods, and to the exciting new chapter ahead. Edward Kingston, lead investor at Meridian Capital, raised his glass with a genuine smile. Around the private dining room of Ellsworth, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, crystal glasses clinked, and champagne flowed freely. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as the investors beamed with enthusiasm. After months of negotiations, I had finally secured an $8 million investment to expand my family's specialty food business on a national scale. The celebration was in full swing, and my parents, happier than I'd seen them in years, were basking in the moment. "I'm Madison Sinclair," I said quietly to myself. 8 years ago, I had walked away from a promising finance career to save my parents' failing gourmet shop. People thought I was insane, leaving my six-figure salary for a family business on the verge of bankruptcy. But where others saw risk, I saw potential. I remember when your parents' shop was just that small store in Cambridge. Vivian, my former business school professor, who had connected me with the investors, said, "And now look at you, national distribution, an online subscription model, manufacturing partnerships. What a remarkable transformation." I could feel the warmth of pride spread through me as the investors nodded their approval. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. I had restructured operations, rebranded our product line, secured strategic partnerships, and even built our e-commerce platform from scratch. Sinclair Fine Foods had grown from a beloved local shop to a budding national brand, with our artisanal jams and condiments now shipping to 48 states. "None of this would have been possible without Madison's vision," my father said, raising his glass. "When Helen and I started this business 25 years ago, we never imagined it could become what it is today." My mother smiled, but there was a flicker of hesitation on her face that I knew all too well. As the investors discussed the expansion plans I had meticulously prepared, I felt my mother's hand slip into mine beneath the table. "Madison, dear," she whispered, her perfume a familiar scent that enveloped me. "This is all so exciting. But remember, when William comes back from his program next month, he'll make a better CEO for the family business. You've done wonderful groundwork, but he has the right education for this scale." William, my brother, the golden child, who had been away in Europe for the past year, finishing his MBA and barely checking in on the family business I had been rebuilding with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I kept my smile firmly in place as I squeezed my mother's hand back, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. 8 years of 18-hour days, skipped vacations, and a personal life that had been put on hold, and she still saw me as the temporary caretaker of William's birthright. "Everything okay?" Kingston asked, noticing our exchange. "Absolutely perfect," I replied, raising my glass higher, but behind my smile, my mind was already racing. Monday couldn't come soon enough. 8 years ago, I had been a rising star at Morgan Stanley when my father called with the news that changed everything. The family business was failing. They had overextended with a second location, and the recession had hit their luxury food items hard. They were 3 months away from closing their doors for good. I still remember my colleagues' reactions when I resigned. "You're leaving finance to sell fancy jam?" my boss had asked incredulously. Even William, then finishing his undergraduate degree, had questioned my decision. "It's a sinking ship, Maddie. Let it go and find them something else to do." But I couldn't let it go. Sinclair Fine Foods wasn't just a shop. It was my parents' legacy. I had grown up watching them craft recipes, source ingredients from small family farms, and build personal relationships with every customer. Walking away from my finance career wasn't just about saving a business. It was about preserving a family dream. The first 2 years were brutal. I worked the front counter during the day and crunched numbers at night. I sold our second location, renegotiated supplier contracts, and modernized our accounting systems. I took out a second mortgage on my condo to fund our e-commerce platform and slept in the stockroom for 6 months when I couldn't make both the mortgage and rent payments. Meanwhile, William graduated and took an entry-level job at a consulting firm. He occasionally offered advice from the sidelines, but he was too busy building his own career to help with the family business. My parents never seemed to mind his absence. They were always quick to point out how he was gaining valuable experience that would someday benefit Sinclair Fine Foods. I, on the other hand, was transforming the business. Our handcrafted preserves caught the attention of a food blogger whose post went viral. I leveraged that exposure into a subscription box service that now had 20,000 monthly subscribers. Last year, I secured partnerships with 3 national gourmet grocery chains, increasing our revenue by 340%. Through it all, my parents remained strangely ambivalent about my contributions. They were grateful, yes, but there was always an underlying current of, "This is temporary." They still saw William as the one who would eventually take over as the firstborn and only son, a family assumption that no amount of my success seemed to change. Madison. Kingston's voice pulled me back to the present. The investors were looking at me expectantly. "I'm sorry," I said, composing myself. "Could you repeat that?" "I was asking about your vision for the company's leadership structure moving forward," Kingston said. "Your operational plan is excellent, but I want to make sure we're aligned on management." The question hung in the air, and my mother tensed beside me. This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating for years. "The leadership structure will remain as it is currently," I said carefully, aware of my mother's eyes on me. "I'll continue as CEO, with my parents serving as brand ambassadors and advisors to preserve the authentic family story that our customers connect with." Kingston nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. "And what about your brother?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "William has just completed his executive MBA at Wharton. He'll be joining the leadership team next month, bringing valuable perspectives from his consulting experience." I kept my expression neutral, despite the familiar sting. William had spent exactly 3 weekends at the shop in the past 8 years. Yet my mother spoke as though he had been integral to our growth all along. Kingston shifted his gaze between my mother and me, clearly sensing the tension. "I see. And what will his role be?" "We haven't finalized that yet," I said quickly. "We're focusing on closing this investment round first." But my mother wasn't finished. "William has always had the strongest head for business in the family," she said proudly. "Madison has done wonderfully with the creative aspects, but William understands the financial side in a way that will be crucial for this expansion." I nearly choked on my drink. I had been a financial analyst before joining the family business. I had restructured our entire operation and had just secured an $8 million investment. Yet somehow, in my mother's eyes, William was the business expert. I noticed Kingston exchange a glance with Diane Thomas, another key investor. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle recalculation that I recognized from my years in finance. They were reassessing the deal. "Mrs. Sinclair," Kingston said carefully, "our investment is largely based on Madison's track record and vision. We'd need to discuss any significant leadership changes before finalizing the agreement." My mother looked surprised, as though it had never occurred to her that the investors might be backing me, not the family name. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. Of course," he said. "We're all on the same page here. Madison has built something remarkable, and we're just proud parents. excited to have both our children involved. Nothing is set in stone. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the damage was done. As dinner wound down, I noticed Kingston speaking quietly with his team, their expressions serious. When we said our goodbyes, his handshake was firmer than usual. "We should talk," he murmured. "First thing Monday, just you." I nodded, understanding perfectly. The investors hadn't missed my mother's intentions or the implications for their $8 million investment. As my parents and I rode back in the town car, they chatted excitedly about William's return, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, a plan already forming in my mind. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. I barely slept that night. By 6 a.m., Saturday, I was at my desk in the empty Sinclair Fine Foods headquarters, surrounded by spreadsheets, market analyses, and 8 years of documentation. The cleaning staff seemed surprised to see me there on a weekend, but they had grown accustomed to my unconventional hours over the years. "Miss Sinclair, everything okay?" asked Jorge, our head of maintenance, who had been with us since I took over. "Just preparing for a big meeting," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "Another one? After that fancy dinner last night? You work too hard, you know." I smiled despite myself. "I appreciate the concern, Jorge, but this one's important. Maybe the most important meeting I've ever had." After he left, I made a call I had been considering for months, but had held off on out of loyalty to my family. "Madison, it's 6:30 on a Saturday," came Vivian's groggy voice. My former professor and mentor was always an early riser, but even this was pushing it. "I need your advice," I said, without preamble, "and possibly your help." 45 minutes later, Vivian walked through the door with 2 coffees and a determined look on her face. After I explained the situation, she sat back, carefully studying me. "You've been anticipating this moment for years," she remarked. "What do you really want, Madison?" The question hung in the air as I paused to consider my response. What did I truly want? Recognition from my parents? The CEO position I had already been performing? Or something else entirely? "I want what I've earned," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to stop pretending that my family values my contribution." Vivian nodded. "Then, let's make some calls." By noon, I had spoken with Kingston and arranged an emergency meeting with the investment team for Sunday morning. I also called my loyal employees, Daphne from marketing, Jason from operations, and Tamara from product development, asking them to come in for an urgent strategy session. These were the people who had stood by me from the very beginning, the ones who had helped build this company while William was off finding himself, before his MBA. Meanwhile, my parents had called twice, eager to discuss the exciting ideas William had shared for the business. I let the calls go to voicemail. This weekend wasn't about William or my parents. It was about securing my future, with or without Sinclair Fine Foods. Sunday morning arrived, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I'd barely slept, working through financial projections until 3 a.m. Kingston and his team arrived promptly at 9, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. "Madison," Kingston began as they settled into the conference room. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I trust my instincts. Something about that dinner concerns me." "You're right to be concerned," I replied, sliding folders across the table to each of them. Page 1 is the current organizational chart for Sinclair Fine Foods. Page 2 shows what I suspect will happen after the investment closes, if my parents have their way. The second chart revealed William as CEO, with me shifted into a vague creative director role with no real authority. Kingston frowned. This wasn't what we discussed during our negotiations. No, it wasn't, I agreed. But it's been the unspoken plan in my family since I joined the business. No matter what I achieve, William is the presumed heir to the company. And what's on page 3? Asked Diane Thomas, flipping forward in her folder. I took a deep breath. That's my counter-proposal. The room went quiet as the investors reviewed the document. It outlined a new company structure, one that didn't include my parents or the Sinclair name at all. This is unexpected, Kingston said finally. You're proposing we redirect our investment to a new entity that you would lead? Yes, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Let me show you why that makes financial sense for everyone involved. I clicked through a presentation I had prepared overnight. The market validation is already there, I explained. Our customer base doesn't primarily connect with the Sinclair name. They connect with our product quality and brand story, both of which I created. The investors listened intently as I detailed our sales growth and presented customer surveys, showing that the most associated attributes with our brand, innovation, sustainability, and community connection, were all initiatives I had led. None of it had been part of the family legacy. What about the manufacturing relationships? Asked Thomas. Wouldn't you be starting from zero? I shook my head. Our 3 main manufacturing partners have contracts with renewal provisions coming up next quarter. I've maintained those relationships personally for years. They know who really runs this business. As the meeting progressed, I laid out a complete business plan, not just for Sinclair Fine Foods, but for the future of a brand that would live beyond my parents' legacy. Your plan is impressive, Kingston said, exchanging glances with his team. We'll need to conduct proper due diligence, but I'm inclined to redirect our investment as you've proposed, with some modifications to protect all parties involved. A wave of relief washed over me. Thank you. I was prepared to walk away with nothing, if necessary. That wouldn't serve anyone's interest, Kingston replied. Least of all ours. But I have one condition. After explaining everything, Daphne said, I always wondered if you had an exit strategy. Vivian had always been an early riser, but even this early, I could hear the concern in her voice as she answered. Madison, it's 6:30 a.m. Saturday. I need your advice, I said, cutting straight to the point. And possibly your help. The support I received from Daphne, Jason, and Tamara was immediate. We've worked with you for years, Madison, not with the Sinclair name, Jason said. In a heartbeat, Tamara added. We've actually discussed this. We figured this day might come, especially with William finishing his MBA. The knowledge that my team stood by me made all the difference. I didn't have to do this alone. As I pulled into their driveway later, my phone rang. It was William. He was calling from the airport, sounding cheerful as ever. Hey, Maddie. Just landed. Mom mentioned something about a big investment. Looks like the timing of my return couldn't be better. I smiled to myself. The timing is perfect, I replied. I'll see you tomorrow at the office. Tomorrow, Monday, when everything would change. The Sunday evening conversation with my parents went exactly as I'd expected. My father tried to defend William's consulting job that he quit after 2 years, his MBA that I paid for while reinvesting my salary into saving our company. Madison, please understand. This was always the plan. William is the firstborn. I'm 37 years old, I interrupted. I've increased company revenue by 3,000% since taking over. I secured an $8 million investment based on my vision and execution. But none of that matters because William was born first, because he's your son and not your daughter. At that moment, I realized I hadn't wanted to see it, the truth about where my family's loyalties truly lay. Monday morning arrived, clear and bright. I had arranged for the investors to meet me at 9 a.m., knowing that my parents typically arrived at 8:30, and William had texted that he would join at 8:45. I arrived early at 7:30, giving myself time to center my thoughts before what was to come. To my surprise, Daphne, Jason, and Tamara were already there, along with about a dozen other key employees. "What's going on?" I asked, surprised to see them so early. William strolled in at 8:45, wearing an expensive suit and exuding the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to fight for recognition. He greeted employees he barely knew with handshakes and declarations of how excited he was to take the helm of the family business. I watched from my glass-walled office as he worked the room, already playing the role of CEO without earning a single moment of it. My mother beamed with pride, pointing out various aspects of the operation to him, as if he were the one who had made it all possible. "Let me introduce you to my son, William," she said. Kingston interrupted her politely but firmly. "Actually, Mrs. Sinclair, we're here to speak with Madison, though I think it would be beneficial for all of you to join us in the conference room." The moment of reckoning had arrived. The conference room felt charged with tension as everyone took their seats. My parents and William on one side, the investment team on the other, with me at the head of the table. It's become clear there may be some discrepancy in expectations regarding the company's future leadership, Kingston said. My father cleared his throat. "We've always envisioned Sinclair Fine Foods as a true family business, with both our children contributing their unique strengths." "With all due respect, Mr. Sinclair," Diane Thomas interjected, "our investment was predicated on continuity of leadership. Madison has demonstrated exceptional business acumen, growing this company from near bankruptcy." The room fell silent. My mother's face had gone pale, her eyes darting between William and Kingston. "We have a proposition," Kingston announced, sliding a folder toward my parents. "Two options, actually. I suggest you review them carefully." Inside the folder were two legal documents. The first outlined the original investment deal, but with explicit language ensuring I would remain CEO for a minimum of 5 years, with William limited to a non-executive role. "Let's be clear," I said, my voice steady. "I'm protecting the value I've created. You may have built the business, but William wasn't here when I was sleeping on a cot in the stockroom to make payroll, when I was personally delivering orders because we couldn't afford shipping fees, or when I was redesigning our entire product line while working the register." My mother looked stricken. "You can either recognize what I've built and who built it, or you can watch me walk away with everything that makes this company valuable." For nearly 10 minutes, the only sound in the conference room was the shuffling of papers as my parents and William examined the documents. Kingston and his team waited patiently. The employees who had come to stand with me remained at the edges of the room, a visual reminder of where the company's true value resided. Finally, my father sighed deeply and pushed the first document aside. "We'll take it," he said. William, too, had no choice but to accept. 6 months ago, Sinclair Fine Foods was on the verge of collapse. Today, our national expansion is ahead of schedule, and our new product lines have exceeded sales projections by 40%. From the outside, it looks like the perfect success story of family entrepreneurship, but the reality is much more complicated. I carry the Sinclair name on my business cards, but my real legacy is entirely my own.